I do love shooting these old Winchesters, and that's a big part of why I started this channel. Welcome to the Cinnabar. Now, I started this channel largely to show people that it's perfectly safe and acceptable to shoot these old vintage firearms. They're not just closet queens, they're not just safe queens. But we have to use a little common sense. So today we're going to talk about how to blow up your old Winchester. Not that we're going to try to blow one up, but it's good information to have to keep you from doing anything drastic to your own Winchester. Now, the short answer to that is it's a lot harder than you might think. But there's a lot of ways that you can damage them that come short of just completely blowing them up. So stick with us. This ought to be an interesting and informative episode. So now we've got your attention. You want to know what it would take to blow up an old Winchester. Well, so did Winchester. So they did a test back in 1877 to see just what it would take to blow up an 1876 Winchester. Now, this is information that was shared recently on a thread on the Winchester Arms Collectors Association forum. And if you haven't been on that forum and you're interested in Winchesters, take some time to go check it out, because there's just some incredible information and some incredible threads and discussions on there. Okay, so we're going to start off talking about what most people consider the weakest of the actions in the Winchesters, and that's the toggle link actions that were used in the Henrys, the 73s, 76s, and that's this action here that we're talking about. Now, this particular rifle is a 1873 or early second model, but this test was with a 76. Now, this was in 1876 or 1877 when this test was conducted, so we're going to make an assumption that it was a 45-75 because that's the only cartridge that was out at that time in the 76 models. It isn't specified here. Okay, so what they did is they took a test rifle and put increasing charges and increasing bullet weights until they basically blew up the action. So let me read to you just exactly what they did. Now, the first test, they fired 20 times with the left link removed. So there was only the right link in the rifle. Charge was a regular cartridge and it worked well. So they fired it 20 times. They took the left toggle link out and just left the right side in, put the side plates back on, and shot it 20 times, no problems. Now, what they couldn't know at that time, because they hadn't been out in the field enough, is that almost invariably when we have a broken toggle link in an 1876, it's the right side link. So they were testing the weak link, okay, I'm sure without even knowing. Okay, so it did well for 20 rounds with a regular charge, 75 grains, 350 grain projectile, although it doesn't say that. But the second test is fired with a charge of 105 grains. Now, we've upped it 30 grains, almost half again as much, and put 2 bullets in with a lead weight of 700 grains. So that's why I assumed that the first one was a 350 grain bullet. Worked well. Okay, so we've upped the charge pretty dramatically, almost 50%, and doubled the bullet weight, no problem. Okay, third test, fired with a charge of 165 grains. Now we're more than double the charge, and 3 bullets now with a lead weight of 1,050 grains. Now, at this point, we have to assume that they're putting in a cartridge and then muzzle loading, because I don't see any way they could put 105 or 165 grains of black powder in a case that's designed for 75 grains. Okay, and of course you can't put multiple bullets in on top of that charge as well without just using it as a muzzle loader. Okay, worked well again. So our fourth test, we're up to 203 grains of powder now. Almost 3 times the normal charge. And 4 bullets with a weight of 1,400 grains. Again, worked well. So here we go again. Now, we've stopped adding powder at this point. We're at 203 grains, and for the rest of the test, they continue with 203 grains of black powder. Now we've got 5 bullets in the fifth test here with a weight of 1,750 grains of lead. Worked well again. Okay, now we go to our sixth test. Fired with a charge of 203 grains of powder and 6 bullets with a lead weight of 2,100 grains. Okay, now we actually see our first damage, and remember we've only got one toggle link in still. Breech pin slightly bent, arm working stiff. Okay, so we've slightly bent one of the pins, and now our lever's a little stiff because we've got an issue here with the geometry working the lever. 7th test. Now we've got a little bit of damage, and we're going to go ahead and put another bullet in here. Actually, we're going to put heavier bullets in this time. We're going to put 6 martini bullets, 480 grains each, for a lead weight of 2,880 grains. Almost 3,000 grains of lead and 203 grains of black powder. Now we get some action out of this. This charge bent the breech pin. Of course, we'd already bent it a little bit. Blew out the side plates, so we blew the side plates off of the thing and split the frame and otherwise disabled the firearm. Okay, so you think about what it took to blow up an 1876, almost 3,000 grains of lead and a charge almost 3 times the normal charge of black powder. A phenomenal amount of force that took before it actually failed. So the conclusion that a lot of people would draw from this is that the toggle link action that gets a really bad rap is really a very strong action. Okay, yes and no, in my opinion. Okay, yes, it is a strong action, and you can see here that when the lever's closed, that we line up these 3 pins here all right in a row. And of course, if we have both links in, we've got 2 of these toggle links with the pins all lined up in a very strong fashion here from front to back. So yes, by that measure, this is a very strong action. So now we know that these toggle link actions that get such a bad rap for being a weak action really take a tremendous amount of force to make them catastrophically fail. So why is it then that we find so many of these toggle link guns that have had a lot of use, that have broken links, that are extremely loose, are prone to serious headspace? In the case of this particular saddle ring carbine, we've got 30 thousandths headspace over and beyond the rim thickness of the cartridge in here. Okay, and the simple answer is that while these toggle links were way ahead of their time in the 1850s when they were designed, and they lock up very positively, because of their design with the 3 pins holding them in, and this kind of dainty hinge in the middle, and the soft steels that they're made of, they're very prone to wear. Even with the factory loads of the time, if they were shot a lot, they started to get a little sloppy. And now this left side link, like is so often the case, is not broken, but we've just in the hinge itself, we've probably got 20 thousandths play back and forth in just that part. And if we've got other parts here that have been peened through usage, then we're developing even worse problems there in headspace. Now this right hand side, like so many others, is cracked somewhat, and we've probably got a good 30 thousandths play back and forth with that one. And that's not uncommon in these old toggle link guns that have been used a lot like this one. And as we start to develop more tolerance issues here and get sloppier and sloppier, it just makes the problem worse because we're hammering. And so you can imagine then with repeated use of hotter loads, we're going to accelerate that kind of wear and that kind of sloppiness in the firearm. So we can't use the test of whether a load is acceptable is whether or not we shoot it and the gun blows up in our hands. And anything less than that is a safe load. And if we were using that logic, and I don't think any of you would, you know, a 203 grain load of black powder in a 76 with 2100 grains that survived this test, would be an acceptable load. I mean, you couldn't shoot that very many times in a 76, and I'm sure you would have a catastrophic failure. But catastrophic failures are extremely rare. You almost have to try to do it like they did in this test here, or screw up monumentally when you're producing your loads. Now, 76s, particularly 45-75 and the 50-95 with a little larger diameter case, don't have a lot of meat around the chamber area here. So they are prone to, with overcharges, bulge that chamber area some. And I remember reading one time on a forum a fellow talking about how his load for 45-60 in a 76 was a full case of Trail Boss, which is a fluffy powder, but it's a fast burning powder. And how he was having problems, he couldn't extract anymore, and well, his chamber was a little bulged, but his gunsmith told him that was just normal for black powder era rifles. I thought, my goodness, kind of in the back of my mind, Bill Engvall was saying, here's your sign, you know. So we just don't want to push these things all that hard. You know, they're designed to take a lot of abuse, but the hotter the load we put into them, the faster we're going to wear these things out. Up to a point. I mean, we've got a safe range that we can run even in these older guns. And remember, most of the ammunition that was made back in the day was hotter than what is made by the factories today because of they're loading them down for liability issues and whatnot. So, you know, we can play it really safe and still shoot a pretty darn good load, but really shouldn't hot rod these, especially if you're shooting them a lot. Now, if you're getting ready to go on a hunting trip and you're really just dead set on using one of these old rifles, it's okay to push up that velocity quite a little bit. You're not going to blow the gun up, but it's not going to take just repeated use with hot loads in it. Now, I suspect that this 76 that they used for a test rifle, they probably had a big bull barrel on it to ensure that when they got a catastrophic failure, it wasn't in the chamber area of the barrel, but in the receiver itself. So now we've talked about how difficult it is to blow up what's considered the weakest of the Winchester actions, the toggle link action. Now let's talk about blowing up a Winchester barrel. And for those of you who watch the channel much, you've seen me use this as an example before. This is a 1903 vintage, 1894, and 3855 half octagon barrel. Was a nice gun, but it took a extraordinary overcharge, and we can see that in this case we had a chamber failure. We were talking a little bit about the 76s prone to crack or a bulge in the chamber. Well, this went far beyond a bulge and actually blew the chamber apart here. Now, when we have barrel obstructions, and a lot of people have asked if this one did, it did not. You know, wherever that obstruction is down here, if we've had a squib or something, that's where our failure usually occurs. And this one, the bore is completely clean. We just had a massive overpressure in here now in this chamber, and so that's a hard thing to do as well. It takes a tremendous amount of force, because Winchester, when they proof tested their barrels, and every one of these barrels was proof tested in the factory with a double charge initially, and I think later on they made it a little bit more mild on their proof test, but you know, they put in vastly higher pressures through these barrels at the factory than what they would ever see with ammunition in the field. Now, at that time, they didn't have the kind of powders we have today, and people doing a lot of loading and making some really dramatic mistakes with their charges. But it is very, very difficult to blow up a barrel. Now, the interesting part is, you know, we've talked about the weaker actions, and of course in 94s, there's mixed things, mixed opinions. I've heard people say that it's a weak action, others say it's a very strong action. Well, I think we can safely say from this particular experience that it was strong enough to withhold this, because this action, while the front end of the receiver has been blown apart when this chamber came apart, it split the front and we lost some pieces off of the front of the receiver. The action itself is completely unharmed and undamaged. So even with a massive overpressure like this, we didn't sustain any damage. Maybe a little bit of peening on one side of the bolt face was about it. Now, catastrophic failures in a Winchester barrel from overpressure like this are extremely rare. It takes a massive overcharge to do this. Much more common, if we're going to see a barrel failure, is going to be from an undercharge and a squib load. Now, that doesn't mean that pushing velocities, particularly with jacketed bullets, doesn't do damage. Now, if again, we don't want to measure whether a load is safe to shoot in your rifle by whether it blows up or not. But if we're pushing up these velocities, particularly in the non-nickel or non-proof steel barrels like this one, this being a 3855, is not a nickel steel barrel. Winchester did not produce 3855-94 barrels in nickel steel except on special order. And I did an episode recently where I talked about which barrels and which calibers on which different models were produced with nickel steel barrel standard. So go back and look at that one if you're curious about it. But these earlier barrels, these basically a mild steel barrel, the rifling, we get throat erosion and excessive wear on the rifling if we were pushing up those velocities, and like I say, particularly with jacketed bullets. So again, we need to be cautious about what kind of velocities we run. Now, there are people out there that are adamant that you can't shoot anything but black powder through these barrels, and that's not the case at all. That there are plenty of good loads, smokeless loads that can be shot through these, and were. I mean, this gun was produced in 1903, well into the smokeless era, and I'm sure it's had little or no black powder shot through it in its life, and it has, or had, a beautiful bore before the chamber was blown off of it. So we really have to just do our research and know what kind of loads, what kind of pressures that the particular rifle that we're shooting will take, and take care of our rifles. Now, just because you've got a firearm with a nickel steel barrel doesn't mean you can load it up to whatever you want as well. You know, you can blow up a nickel steel barrel too, but it'd take one heck of an effort to do so, and you'd almost have to be trying. Now, we talk about like the 1895s and 405. It's not uncommon to see some throat erosion in those just from shooting a lot of factory loads. So, you know, nickel steel isn't impervious to some damage from doing a lot of shooting as well. And in fact, with the 405, because it was such a powerful cartridge, in reading Teddy Roosevelt's African Game Trails, his son Kermit used a 405 1895 almost exclusively, and Winchester supplied him with all the ammunition for that particular trip. And after almost a year of shooting that 405 regularly on almost a daily basis, he bulged the chamber on it, and he had a wounded animal and he couldn't extract because he had a bulged chamber, and he had to finish the rest of the expedition with a 30-40 Craig 1895. So the whole point here is that while it is extremely difficult to blow up your old Winchester, don't use that as your measure of whether it's a safe load or not. Because at a far lesser pressure, we can damage our firearms, particularly like those toggle link actions and the barrels on these guns at a far lower pressure than a catastrophic failure. And so many people seem to have this notion that it's either safe or it blows up. And there's a big area in there that we want to stay away from. That's really kind of our danger zone, where we're doing long-term damage to our rifle, but it's not going to blow up in our hands. We're just going to wear it out prematurely. Now, I haven't come across a 73 with a barrel failure from overpressure, but I have seen 76s with a bulged and cracked chamber. I've seen an 86 carbine in 4570 that looked much like this one. The chamber came apart like this, cracked the front end of the receiver, but the action was just fine. And then, of course, there's this one that We had a catastrophic barrel failure, and the action survived just fine. So if we're going to blow up a Winchester, most likely we're going to have the failure in the barrel, and the receiver is going to survive, even on the weaker toggle link actions. But hey, let's try not to blow any of them up. So get them out of the closet, get them out of the safe, get these vintage firearms out and shoot them. That's what they're made for. But do your homework. Do it safe and do it right. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, maybe learned a little something. Until next time, happy trails from the Cinnabar.